Have you ever had these well laid out plans ready to move forward only for them to fall completely apart? And the first thing we do sometimes is ask God, why did you allow this to happen? And a lot of times, those plans that are being made are not aligned with what God has for our life. So today, I'm going to be sharing you 3 biblical accounts that really examine when God interrupts man's plans. And a lot of times we're able to see that we are not aligning what we are planning with God's will for our life. And stick around to the end because I'm going to be sharing some practical insight so you can also examine the plans that you've made or the plans that you desire to move forward are in line with God's will and purpose for your life. Now, I took some notes because I don't want to forget anything. And if you know, midlife, I don't think I need to say anymore. So I would make sure I remember everything. So let's get into the first one. So God interrupts plans that are built on pride. So if we look at Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, this is talking about the Tower of Babel. So if many of you are familiar with the story, they were building this tall tower, but they were building it to make a name for themselves, and they weren't necessarily surrendering to God's will. So as a result of that, the plan looked organized, but it wasn't submitted to God because their hearts weren't in a place of submission. So what happened with them building this tower? God then confused their language and stopped the building completely, because at that point they weren't able to continue to communicate with themselves, so they couldn't move forward with the plan that they had laid out. So God confused their language, and then they were scattered all over. And that's how we get all our languages all over the world, because it started here in Genesis from a simple act of pride and not being surrendered to God's will. And sometimes God stops because we're building from pride, pressure, and the need to prove ourselves. So sometimes we get that outside pressure and we get into this whole thing with pride. Well, I'm going to show you and I'm going to make sure that you see that I can accomplish this. But that's not necessarily surrendered to God's will for our life. We're really trying to please and prove things to someone else, and it's contradictory to us really trying to have our heart or having our heart surrendered to God. And what I want you to do, I want you to ask yourself, is the plan that you have, is it about God's will, or is it about trying to prove something? Because remember, everything that we need in life, it comes from obedience and surrender. And us trying to prove something is a moot point, because at the end of the day, God will prepare a table in the presence of our enemies. So there's no need for us to try to prove anything and act in pride, because he's going to disrupt that plan because our heart is not surrendered to him. And the next point that I want to talk about is God interrupts plans that avoid obedience. So if we look at Jonah, in Jonah chapter 1, I know these verses and accounts that I'm given, they're extremely familiar, but it really talks about how God comes in and disrupts everything that we desire to do so that his will and purpose can be fulfilled. So in Jonah was given a specific assignment, and Jonah was very stubborn, and Jonah was like, I'm not doing it. You were telling me to go to Nineveh. I'm not going to Nineveh. And he went in the opposite direction. And I think a lot of times when God gives us a specific assignment, he has a call in our life, our first response is to run in the opposite direction. So there is nothing new under the sun. Everything that we see in the accounts that I'm sharing today have already happened. And this is why I always call the Bible the life's manual, because it doesn't matter what you're encountering or what you're going through. God gets the glory, but he's always going to bring his children back to him. And we have to only be able to be open to that if our heart is surrendered. So in this account, Jonah went in the opposite direction, and God sent a storm to stop Jonah's plan. So he was trying to escape. He was trying to run away, but he sent a storm so that Jonah could go back and be obedient to what God had initially told him to do. So sometimes God disrupts our plans because we are avoiding what he already told us. And we get into this place where we are not being obedient to what he told us, and he's going to send a storm. Now, it may not come the way that Jonah received the storm, but he's going to send a storm to get our attention because we're trying to escape the very thing that he has instructed us to do. But that storm is going to turn us around and bring our attention back to that thing that God instructed us to do. And what I want you to think about from this account is, am I asking God for new direction when I have not obeyed the last instruction that he has given me? Because sometimes when we have things that are happening in our life, there are steps. You know, the word said he orders our steps, and those steps are decent. They're in order, and we can't go out of order and think we want to get to the finish line without obeying and surrendering to that thing that God had already instructed us to do. So think about that. This is definitely a video for examination, because I know that in my life, there have been a lot of opportunities, missed opportunities, where I didn't do what God had instructed me to do. And the storm came. There were accounts where I was operating in pride and he took everything away from me. He stripped everything away from me, where the only thing that I was left to do was to surrender to him. So I'm speaking from a personal place because I've experienced each and every one of these things that have taken place. And I wanted to share this with you because when this came to me to record this video about when God disrupts man's plans, it was personal because I've experienced this and I know what it means to surrender to God's plan for your life. Because when we go in the opposite direction and that storm comes, we have no other option but to fully surrender and turn back to what he has willed for our life. And so the next one I want to talk about it, God interrupts our plans to protect us. So now I want to talk about Balaam. Now, I'm not so good sometimes with some of these biblical names, but this is in Numbers chapter 22, verses 21 through 25. And so Balaam was moving forward, but he was not fully aligned with what God had told him to do. So this is talking about the protection, because he interrupts plans because he want to make sure that we're protected. You know, there are times where we may be running late or something may happen. Say you forget something, you have to go back inside the house. And then as you travel on to your destination, you see that there was an accident or something catastrophic may have happened in the place that you were going to. And had you not come back and God interrupted that plan, you could have very well been involved in that situation. So in this case, the donkey saw an angel before Balaam did. And what Balaam thought was an inconvenience was actually protection. So we get inconvenience with traffic. We get inconvenience when someone is driving slow in front of us. But I want you to reframe your thinking and really look at it as God may be protecting me from something. There may be some protection that's on the horizon that I just don't see. And I need to make sure that I'm heeding to that, because God protects us from things every single day. There's so much danger, so many things that are going on in the world today, and God interrupts plans to protect us. So in this account in Numbers chapter 22, and you read the 21 through 35th verse, you'll see that sometimes delay, a closed door, or frustration is protecting us from something we cannot see. And this is so just, oh my gosh, it's so real, because this has happened to me on so many occasions. And I'm sure there are countless stories of people sharing things that have happened to them as a result of allowing that delay, because God was protecting them from certain things where, you know, sometimes you get that feeling, it's like, oh, I don't think I need to go, or maybe I'll just stay home, or maybe I'll, wait a little bit, and then realize you were actually being protected from something that could have created a different outcome in your life. So think about this question. What if the thing I'm frustrated about is actually God protecting me? So that's another reflection that I want you to think about as you look at these three accounts in the Bible and look at what happens when God comes and disrupts our plans. So now I'm going to give you some practical application, like I promised, because I always like to take what we learn in the Bible and always link it back to some practical application, because I think a lot of people have questions about, okay, we've read these Bible verses, we've seen these things, but how can I apply this to my life? So when God interrupts your plans, these are three things that I want you to think about. I want you to pause before you panic, right? Because I know when we plan things out and things are going haywire and they're falling on apart, the first thing we do is we tend to panic and we're like, oh my God, why is this happening? Don't assume that God has abandoned you. Even in that moment where the plans are falling apart and things aren't going the way that you would have thought they would have gone, God has not left you. He has not abandoned you. He's right there with you. And in that moment, take time to say a small prayer and really ask, Lord, what are you trying to show me here? What is happening? Instead of the response of panicking, thinking that God has left you or abandoned you, because He's right there with you, even in our disobedience, even in our desire to be prideful and do things to try to prove things to others. He's right there for you. Even in those times when I was dealing with those situations that I talked about earlier, I thought that I was alone. And the enemy wants you to feel as though that you were alone. Because of the things that were happening in my life, I felt abandoned. But then I had to realize in my surrender that even though it felt like I was alone, God was still there and He was protecting me. He was teaching me a lesson and He was showing me that I can do nothing without Him. And the next one is ask what God may be revealing. Is this correction? Is this redirection? Is this protection? What are you revealing in this disruption? Ask God, what is He revealing in this disruption in my life? These plans that I've laid out, is it really something that I need to redirect? Is there something that you're trying to protect me from? Is it correction? Is it because I'm not doing that thing that you asked me to do? Just like Jonah, when Jonah was running and running and he sent a storm, he was course correcting so Jonah can go back to Nineveh, to the place that he had instructed him to go. And lastly, hold your plans loosely. So if we look at Proverbs 19, verse 21, it says, there are many plans in a man's heart. Nonetheless, the Lord's counsel that will stand. So even in all the plans that we make, we have to make sure that we're taking everything to the Lord. Nothing is impossible for Him. But we have to make sure that everything that we're doing in our life is being approved by Him. Because once it's approved by Him, we know that regardless of the challenges and things that we may encounter, we know that He is still in the midst of those plans. As a result of discounting Him, moving forward in something that we desire to do, that's when our plans are going to be disrupted. So God is not against planning. You know, we plan things and we have our little planners and to-do lists and things that we want to accomplish, goals and everything. But He is Lord over our plans. He is the one that vets our plans. He is the one that approves our plans. He is the one that already knows the plans before we establish them. So we want to make sure that in our planning, we are including Him in that process so that we don't veer off and go off on our own way. And then we become confused, just like He confused the language of those that were building the Tower of Babel. We want to make sure we're staying on track. And the Tower of Babel really reminds us and teaches us that God can interrupt that pride when we feel as though that we do not need Him. And Jonah teaches us that God can interrupt disobedience. And then Balaam teaches us that God interrupts danger that we cannot see. So when your plans fall apart, just ask, why is this happening? And then allow your heart to be open to receive what God's instruction, correction, or protection is going to be as a result of you asking that simple question. And ask the Lord, what are you showing me at this time? Because a lot of times we get so busy, we're trying to do so much, we're moving forward in the things that we desire in our hearts. We're not taking time to pause and really hear from God. Really listen to what He's saying. Sit still in the thing that we want to do, because we make plans and then we rush to move forward in them. And we don't receive that blessing. We don't receive that green light. And then we become frustrated. Then the storm comes, and then our response in that storm is panic. And we think God has abandoned us. But really sit in that and ask God, what are you showing me at this time? Because sometimes the interruption is protection, the correction, or the redirection that we need to make sure that we're in God's will and purpose for our life. So if this has helped you, let me know in the comments what it is that you're going to do to change the way that you are planning. How are you going to invite God in? Or if there's a testimony that you want to share about how God protected you, how he redirected you, how he corrected you, I would love to hear that. So let me know and share this video with someone who may be going through a hard time in their life. They may have not surrendered their heart to God. Send them to the Bible verses that we went through today and the accounts that are in the Bible so they can see how even in the midst of challenge, even in the midst of just disobedience, God always redirects us back to him. So I want you to remember this. You are an equipped woman living purposed, productive, and prosperous.